LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 30th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 12 best, most newsworthy clips that I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be an informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. Pretty much all the clips fall into my three-topic title. You know, the title, as you already know, clicking on the video, is Just More 2021, War, Pandemic, and Hurricane. Except my political comedy clip isn't on any of those topics, and you might think with the ending of the Afghanistan war, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and Hurricane Ida hitting the Louisiana coast, that there wasn't much room for comedy. But actually, the clip I'm using is from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki's press conference last Friday, and one of the reasons it is kind of comic is because with all that stuff going on, this is the topic that the reporter decided to ask the White House about, the scandal that I've called puppygate, that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Yesterday, the conservative transparency group Judicial Watch released Secret Service records on dog bites involving the first dog, Major. One email said that Secret Service agents were bitten every single day for 8 days from March 1st to March 8th, and that a White House visitor was as well. At a March 9th briefing, you only described one biting incident to us and described the dogs as being whisked back to Delaware on a pre-planned trip to visit family friends. Obviously, that is not the world's most important story, but it is significant because we expect honest information even for minor stories. So can you explain to us why there was a kind of misleading account presented to us? And if we can't get honest information about minor stories, why should we have faith in the administration's account for larger issues like Afghanistan?
I know you do keep the dog in the news in the briefing room, so thank you for that. As we've stated previously, Major has had some challenges adjusting to life in the White House. He has been receiving additional training, as well as spending some time in Delaware, where the environment is more familiar to him and he is more comfortable. I don't have any additional specifics, but I think that speaks to where Major is located, to be fully transparent in your ongoing interest in the dog. Go ahead.
So yeah, that was worth bringing up, I guess, at the press conference. Apparently Major has been a bad dog. But that, I know I have a lot of fans of my dog Sandy out there in the audience, the Dash and Sandy fans. I actually do have a Dash and Sandy clip at the end, so I thought I would include the puppygate clip there to begin the program. But now I want to get to my main topics. I'll mostly be focusing on the problems with ending the U.S. war in Afghanistan. And as part of that, I will have, four newsmakers. I'll have Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. But then I'm going to have sort of a competition between three other anchors cross-examining Republicans who all supported the beginning of the war about what they think about the problems ending the war in Afghanistan. It'll be Jake Tapper versus Mitt Romney, who I think does the best job of the cross-examination on CNN. Then CBS's Ed O'Keefe cross-examining Senator Lindsey Graham, doesn't go very well at all. And then Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday cross-examining Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He leaves out something he wrote a book about, which that'll be the last couple clips on that topic, before I briefly cover what may be the biggest story, the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic, with a clip of Dr. Anthony Fauci at the end. But before I get to that, I want to show you the news summaries from the big five corporate outlets, from the longest to the shortest. And this week, I did a little bit of editing, but the Fox News Sunday news summary ends up being the longest. This week, Chuck Todd had no pre-recorded package, I guess is partly why, but I actually cut off the Fox News Sunday news summary after they had one reporter there who's actually in Afghanistan. I think he's in Afghanistan, and then they were going to the White House for the political aspects, which I cut off. But here you'll see Chris Wallace and Trey Yingst talking briefly, Actually, I think they don't even mention the hurricane or the pandemic, just the problems in Afghanistan, which I will talk with you a little more. I'll talk with you a little more about this news summary after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news on two stories. First, Hurricane Ida, now a dangerous Category 4, lashing the...
I stand corrected. They do mention Hurricane Ida, just not the COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry for that mistaken pre-criticism that was... Anyway, but let's get back to the clip. The first of the news summaries over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news on two stories. First, Hurricane Ida, now a dangerous Category 4, lashing the Louisiana coast 50 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi River with wind speeds of 150 miles per hour. The storm set to make landfall this afternoon, exactly 16 years to the day after Hurricane Katrina, and described by officials as life-altering. More on that later this hour. But first, the next 2 days could be the most tense and dangerous for U.S. troops in Afghanistan since the start of the war some 2 decades ago. They are trying to evacuate some of the thousands of Americans and Afghan civilians, while at the same time rolling up their own operation. Meanwhile, President Biden making good on his promise to retaliate for the deadly suicide bombing in Kabul, ordering a drone strike that killed 2 ISIS-K planners and wounded another. As his advisors warn, another attack on the airport is likely before the U.S. completes its exit. In a moment, we'll discuss all this with the president's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. We begin with Fox team coverage. David Spun is at the White House, but first, Trey Yingst in Doha, Qatar, with the latest on the ongoing withdrawal. Trey.
Chris, on Tuesday, American forces will pack their bags and leave Afghanistan after 20 years. Today, the State Department is telling U.S. citizens to stay away from Kabul's airport, citing a credible terror threat. Days after a suicide bomber killed 13 American service members and an estimated 170 Afghans, U.S. troops are on high alert. And while the Taliban has expanded their security perimeter around the Hamid Karzai International Airport, the entire city remains on edge.
Well, I would say last 6 or 7 days have been the toughest days of my life.
You can hear the exhaustion in the voices of civilians still desperate to flee Afghanistan. 2 weeks ago, the Taliban took over the capital of Kabul. Since then, more than 120,000 people have been evacuated. American allies like the UK, Spain, and Italy finished flights out of Kabul this weekend, amid questions about how many people will leave once the August 31st withdrawal deadline passes. The Taliban told Fox News this week that Americans will be able to safely exit the country, adding this.
Those Afghans who were working with foreigners and foreign troops, if they have passport, they can be evacuated through commercial flights. There is no hurdle, no obstacle on their way.
With air evacuations coming to an end, the United Nations is warning 500,000 Afghans could flee on foot in the coming weeks. Chris?
Trey Yingst reporting from Doha. Trey, thank you. Now, let's bring in David Spun at the White House with the latest on how President Biden is handling the final pullout from Afghanistan. David.
Chris, the president will meet once again.
That was almost my title topic from last week, how President Biden is handling the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, or Afghanistan humanitarian crisis. So Fox News should catch up on that. But I made another mistake. Not only before I showed the clip did I say that they didn't mention the hurricane, although, like I said, they didn't mention the pandemic, maybe the biggest story, looking back, 5, 10, 15 years from now at this week. But they also had Trey Yingst not reporting from Afghanistan. I couldn't remember for sure because I actually wanted to criticize Fox News for that. They had him reporting from Doha, Qatar, on what's happening in Afghanistan. And a lot of news organizations do that, but it reminds me of how Fox News criticized Vice President Kamala Harris for going to the wrong part of the border to check out the crisis. She was hundreds of miles away from where the real crisis is. Well, then why do they have Trey Yingst reporting on what's happening in Kabul, Afghanistan from Doha, Qatar? That was just one little extra criticism I wanted to add there. And now I will get to the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, where, if I recall, Chuck Todd does talk about Hurricane Ida and the problems with ending the U.S. war in Afghanistan. And he has a conversation with their reporter, actually in Afghanistan, if I recall. Maybe he's in Doha, Qatar, but I'm pretty sure he's in Afghanistan. We'll find out in the clip. But what I do remember from the clip is that the way Chuck Todd's conversation with Richard Engel ends is kind of a metaphor for the way the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan is ending, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good Sunday morning. We are tracking this very dangerous Hurricane Ida, which is heading towards the Louisiana coast. Forecasters say this storm has rapidly intensified and it's turned quickly into a monster-sized Category 4 hurricane. We'll have an update later in this broadcast, but we're going to begin with the suicide bombing attack in Kabul that took the lives of some 170 Afghans, plus those of 13 American service members. It's the very nightmare scenario the Biden administration most feared. Americans are being warned right now to stay away from the airport, and President Biden added yesterday that another terror attack is highly likely in the next 24 to 36 hours. Mr. Biden vowed revenge for Thursday's bombing, and on Friday, the U.S. made its first reprisal strike on ISIS-K, with the military saying it killed 2 high-profile targets. Evacuation flights are continuing just 2 days short of the August 31st deadline, even under the threat of another terror attack. So as the U.S. winds down its presence in Afghanistan, many questions remain. How will the U.S. be able to counter terrorist threats in Afghanistan with U.S. forces soon completely out of the country, along with critical intelligence capabilities no longer available? What becomes of the 250,000 Afghans who helped the U.S. war effort, many of whom are still going to be stuck in Afghanistan? How big a political toll will this chaos and carnage in Kabul take on Mr. Biden's presidency long term? And most of all, was the 20-year war in Afghanistan worth it? Joined now by NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. So, Richard, this is how it ends. 20 years. What's the fallout?
Well, I think the fallout is huge, and I think we're going to be feeling this for many years to come. The same way that the Iraq War created a hole in the Middle East, and then all the countries around it shifted, and it caused tremendous instability, and ultimately we saw the rise of ISIS. Now, to a degree, the United States and other nations have managed to plug that hole, but it took a long time. Now, the collapse of Afghanistan, taken over by the Taliban, is creating a hole in Central Asia. And it's going to impact, it's going to suck in the countries all around it. It's going to suck in Pakistan, it's going to suck in Iran. With Iraq, it tore up the Middle East that was established after the First World War. It tore up the old maps. Here, I would be looking at the Durand Line, the line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This used to be called the Great Game for Central Asia. And with this pullout, we've just restarted the Great Game.
What is America's role going to be in Afghanistan? Is it going to be similar to how we handle Syria, where we just go in, find a terror target, try to deal with that, and sort of play whack-a-mole?
Oh, come on.
Well, it looks like we lost Richard Engel there. No worries, Richard, in Doha for us. Richard, thank you. Look, last night I spoke with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and I began by asking him.
And we'll have an Antony Blinken clip later, but did I deliver on my promise that the end of Richard Engel's interview was a metaphor for the entire U.S., the end of the U.S. war in Afghanistan? I think I did deliver on that promise. You can let me know what you think in the comments section. I mean, I don't know. I think that might have been, some of that was a little bit of an overstatement of the impact of U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. I heard him say that the war in Iraq tore up the old lines from the end of World War I. That I don't know, if you look at like the Sykes-Picot agreement, the secret agreement between the British and the French to like split up the Middle East after World War I think you'll see a lot of those countries are still there. I don't really think that we've quite torn up the torn up the map on that. So that's my analysis as a history major who has studied some of the history of the Middle East. Not like an expert or anything, but Richard Engel, he's supposed to be an expert, right? So his analysis should be better. But now I'm going to move on to Martha Raddatz and her news summary, talking to Ian Pannell. And this news summary, I've talked a lot about how Martha Raddatz is very close to the military-industrial complex, which means that she gets good access, but often will also be a messenger for the military-industrial complex. And Ian Pannell here, I think I kept this playing through the first part of his report, so you can see he actually is the purveyor of misinformation from the military-industrial complex. He does couch it in terms of developing information, but anyway, I don't want to give the whole thing away. I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. And I'm not even sure they mention Hurricane Ida or the pandemic. I think it might be all Afghanistan at the beginning of the program over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. 2 weeks since the fall of Kabul, 2 days until the deadline for U.S. troops to withdraw. This morning, the U.S. on high alert. President Biden warning Saturday that another attack on the Kabul airport remains highly likely in the next 24 to 36 hours. And overnight, the U.S. Embassy in Kabul again urging Americans to leave the airport area due to a specific credible threat. It comes at the end of an already desperate and deadly week in Afghanistan. Thursday's suicide bomb attack claiming the lives of more than 170 Afghans, one of the deadliest attacks in the history of the war. And the nation now mourning the loss of 13 U.S. service members, the largest loss of Americans in Afghanistan in more than a decade. Most of them Marines in their 20s. Lance Corporal David Espinoza from Texas, who graduated from high school just 2 years ago. Riley McCollum, who was just weeks away from welcoming his first child. Nicole G., 23 years old, cradling an infant during the evacuation at the airport. President Biden traveling to Dover Air Force Base this morning, attending the dignified transfer of those service members, one final trip home. Late Friday, a U.S. drone strike aimed at ISIS-K terrorists, members of the group claiming credit for the blast. But the threat from the group still active. So where do we go from here in these next perilous hours? I spoke with Secretary of State Antony Blinken late yesterday. We'll bring you that interview in a moment. But we begin with the latest. This morning, the U.S. conducted another airstrike in Afghanistan, this one to take out a vehicle-borne IED that posed a threat to the airport. Ian Pannell joins us now from Qatar. What do we know about this airstrike, Ian?
Yeah, Martha, what we're hearing from the U.S. military, and of course this is still evolving and likely to change, but they're saying this was a targeted drone strike against, as you say, a vehicle-borne IED, in other words, a suicide car bomb that they believe was driving towards Hamid Karzai International Airport. That's where the U.S. troops are based. That's where the evacuation mission is taking place. There was a drone strike on this vehicle. They say they believe it was successful. They say that there was a secondary explosion afterwards that gives them confidence that it was a VBIED. At the moment, they're saying there are no reports of civilian casualties. There are things floating around on social media that are unverified. We have to wait and see what the full assessment is after that. But yes, this underlines once again the threat to the troops as they pull out of the country, and also the enduring threat from ISIS and other terrorist organizations inside Afghanistan as we up sticks and leave. Martha?
And Ian, in light of these threats, the big question now, how does the military...
So yeah, that goes on, and as usual, you can see the source of all my clips at links I put down in the video description, including ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. You can watch the whole program there and watch the rest of Ian Pannell's conversation with Martha Raddatz. But you see there that he says they are saying so far no civilian casualties, despite some things that may be floating around on social media. And you notice he's also reporting from Doha, Qatar, which I guess means that he's like sitting in some press room that the military set up, getting fed information by the military and then telling it to us on ABC, and the follow-up reports have shown, I think there were 8 children killed in that drone strike, like 10 civilians, 8 of whom were children, I think is what the news coverage is now confirming. But at least the military got their message out there first. And that may be the only message some people hear about that airstrike. So that's kind of what I was talking about before I showed the clip, in terms of ABC carrying the message of the military-industrial complex. And now I'm going to get to the CNN State of the Union news summary. Jake Tapper actually started the show twice, and because it was a special 2-hour State of the Union. So many topics, and Jake Tapper mentions all 3 of my main topics, because they are the 3 main topics, basically, of the the 3 big crises of the weekend: the end of the war in Afghanistan, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic that's getting worse, and the Hurricane Ida crisis that sort of was ongoing through Sunday, Monday. Now it's just a tropical storm, still doing a lot of flooding damage, but it was one of the strongest hurricanes to hit maybe the strongest to hit the Louisiana coast, one of the strongest to make landfall in the United States. And so it's not like the hurricane that was going up to hitting New York, that I thought was over exaggerated, because that's where all the media is. I talked about that in previous shows. This one actually, I think, is at least worth mentioning, not necessarily doing what I'll show you CBS does in the following clip, but here I think Jake Tapper has the right balance on CNN State of the Union yesterday morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is trying to pull off an infinite number of miracles. That's how one veteran described the race to save Americans and Afghan allies still stuck in Afghanistan. And in addition to the terrifying situation on the ground in Kabul, we're covering on this special 2-hour State of the Union 2 other crises. The second is on the Gulf Coast of the United States, where on this anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, folks are waking up to horrible news. Hurricane Ida grew rapidly overnight to become a dangerous Category 4 storm. We'll talk to Louisiana's Governor John Bel Edwards coming up. And of course, the third crisis, which has been with us since last year, COVID. We'll ask Dr. Anthony Fauci about rising COVID deaths, boosters, and vaccines for children. But let's begin on Afghanistan, because as we learn the names of the 13 U.S. service members killed by terrorists on Thursday, we are now just 2 days away from the August 31st deadline to get U.S. service members out of what is now, sadly, the Taliban's turf. This morning, President Biden is meeting with the families of those Americans killed at Dover Air Force Base before the dignified transfer of their flag-draped caskets. Meanwhile, Biden is warning another imminent attack on the Kabul airport is highly likely. The president also pledging the U.S. will continue to retaliate for the terrorist attack, and that a U.S. airstrike that took out 2 of its leaders Friday was not the last. The Pentagon announced this weekend that the U.S. military has already begun leaving the Kabul airport, though it remains in control there as of now, and is continuing to evacuate people. 2,000 were flown out over a 12-hour period yesterday. Joining us now, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, thanks for joining us.
And I don't have a Jake Sullivan clip. One thing I realized I forgot to mention about the ABC news summary, when I saw Jake Tapper mentioning the service members who were killed, that was something that ABC, you saw, added kind of different from the other news summaries. They showed pictures of all 13 service members who died. They gave like a brief synopsis, biography of 3 of the service members, including this one woman who was from where I am in Sacramento. And I mean, there's nothing really wrong with that. I think it does support my argument about ABC and Martha Raddatz being a messenger for the military-industrial complex. But I mean, one thing that it makes me wonder about is, you saw the chyron there while Jake Tapper was talking, over 1,200 deaths a day from COVID in the United States. And I mean, I just sometimes wonder why it is that none of those 1,200 people get that kind of coverage in the beginning. And that's something that's going on every day now. And that means within 3 days, we'll have more Americans killed by the COVID-19 crisis than died on 9/11, and you're going to hear a lot about 9/11 when I get to those Republicans, as to, why we had to go in there, and that's a 20-year war based on the number of Americans dying who are dying every 3 days now. And anyway, that's something I wanted to bring up based on how ABC spotlighted those service members who, of course, I'm not saying they don't deserve to be spotlighted. I'm just juxtaposing it to all those other dead people who aren't being spotlighted. And speaking of not spotlighting the right thing, CBS again this week spent the beginning of their program talking about the hurricane more than Afghanistan and COVID, which just in the long run may not be the most important of the three stories, as I will talk about a little more after we watch that shortest of the news summaries that I kind of cut off when they started showing some guy standing out in the rain over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. As we come on the air this busy Sunday morning, Hurricane Ida is threatening the Gulf Coast, likely hitting mid-afternoon, exactly 16 years to the day that Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And the terror threat, meanwhile, in Afghanistan is still extremely high as the U.S. continues airlifts to evacuate the last remaining Americans. President Biden is in Dover, Delaware this morning for the dignified transfer of the remains of those 13 Americans killed in the Kabul airport suicide bombing last week. That bombing also killed more than 170 Afghans. Plus, the COVID Delta variant continues to spread, particularly among children. We'll get to that later, but we begin this morning on Louisiana's Gulf Coast with Hurricane Ida. CBS News' Omar Villafranca begins in New Orleans. Omar?
Ed, good morning. At last check, there were about 30,000 people who were without power as we're starting to see the outer bands of Ida hit. We're seeing some gusts, a little bit of rain, and we're also seeing some last-minute preparation.
Hey, he wasn't even standing out in the rain. They actually go on to like a second person who was standing out in the rain. But like I said, the source of all the clips is down in the video description for CBS News' Face the Nation. If you click on the link I have down under sources, you get to the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel where the entire program is split into clips, including their report on Hurricane Ida. At least Ed O'Keefe mentioned all three of the stories at the beginning, showed the picture of the 13 dead service members, but why they devoted so much of I guess it's like the breaking news, but you notice there the reporter who was talking about 30,000 people without power. Now it's like millions. It was like a preview of the story that is actually a bigger story today as to the impact. I believe all of New Orleans is going to be without power for days because all the power lines are in the Mississippi River, and there are some towns where outside of New Orleans where levees broke and there may be quite a few deaths. Probably not 1,200. Which is how many people are dying every day from COVID, but I don't know how you actually, measure those things in terms of newsworthiness, like I was talking about before. But the one thing I do know is that I think Hurricane Ida is going to be a smaller story historically than the end of the U.S. war in Afghanistan happening in the next several hours, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which has killed over 600,000 people just in the United States, and who knows how it's even going to end at this point. And I'll talk about that when I get to the Dr. Anthony Fauci clip. But now I have 4 newsmaker clips on problems ending the U.S. war in Afghanistan. First, I'm going to have Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press about some Republican talking points trying to make the Biden administration look bad for things they supposedly did. There are a couple of them that Chuck Todd runs past the Secretary of State, and you can see how he answers it for those people who say that the mainstream media doesn't ask tough questions of the Biden administration. There, you got one of those. But then I have 3 Republicans being cross-examined by anchors as they try to justify the war in Afghanistan and how we should have stayed there, forever, the forever wars, the endless wars, and like I said, I think Jake Tapper does the best job with Mitt Romney. Ed O'Keefe does a really bad job with Lindsey Graham, and Chris Wallace doesn't do a great job with Mitch McConnell. But first, here's Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking to Chuck Todd about these stories that I've been hearing on Fox News all week that Biden is doing these terrible things with the Taliban, both like giving them kill lists and giving them, promising them all this money. And here's Antony Blinken responding to those yesterday morning on NBC News' Meet the Press over here.
I want to ask about this idea that some of these lists of people that you're trying to get out of the country, you've had to give to the Taliban. And I know you guys have some that you think some of this has been a bit over-reported or exaggerated. But given the Haqqani network's ties to the Taliban, how can you be sure any list you share of Afghans who helped Americans won't be used for horrendous reasons by the Haqqani network or others?
Chuck, it's simply not the case. The idea that we've done anything to put at further risk those that we're trying to help leave the country is simply wrong. And the idea that we shared lists of Americans or others with the Taliban is simply wrong.
What was shared?
And in specific instances, when you're trying to get a bus or a group of people through, and you need to show a manifest to do that, because particularly in cases where people don't have the necessary credentials on them or documents on them, then you'll share names of the list on people of the bus so they can be assured that those are people that we're looking to bring in. And by definition, that's exactly what's happened. We've gotten 5,500 American citizens out of Afghanistan, and to the extent that in an individual case with a particular group or a bus, to verify that the people on the bus or in that group were people who were supposed to come out, American citizens, especially again if they lacked the right document with them, that's what we would do. But the idea that we put anyone in any further jeopardy is simply wrong.
What has been promised to the Taliban for this cooperation? Is it money? Is it money that we have frozen right now that they perhaps might be able to use for governing?
Nothing has been promised to the Taliban. To the contrary, we have made very clear, and not just us, country upon country around the world have made clear that there are very significant expectations of the Taliban going forward if they're going to have any kind of relationship with the rest of the world, starting with freedom of travel, but then going on to making sure that they're sustaining the basic rights of their people, including women and girls, making sure that they're making good on commitments they've repeatedly made on counterterrorism, and having some inclusivity in governance.
I want to ask about the strike on ISIS-K. This was done very...
So there you see the Secretary of State answering those Fox News Republican talking points I've been hearing all week as to whether the Biden administration gave a kill list to the Taliban and whether they're bribing the Taliban with all this money to do what they want. And you can decide whether you believe the Secretary of State's answers or not, but at least Chuck Todd should get credit for bringing those issues up. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan were on the programs taking care of answering some of those questions. But like I said, the next three clips I want to show you are anchors cross-examining Republicans. And this is a 7-minute clip of Jake Tapper cross-examining Mitt Romney on not those little tactical things about how we're withdrawing, but like, should we have stayed, should we stay or should we go, right? And but not so much was it a good war in the first place is my one criticism I will talk about with you a little more after we watch those 7 minutes together over here.
But this is the situation we're in, regardless of how we got here. And there is this very real trade-off that we were talking about on my show during the week and also here before the terrorist attack. The risk of keeping American service members there is what happened Thursday. So if we stay there until no American and no Afghan SIV applicant is left behind, we risk more events like Thursday.
Yeah, but Jake, if you focus on, gosh, what should we do right now? Recognize that we're in the position we're in right now because of terrible decisions made by two administrations. One, the Trump administration, negotiating directly with the Taliban, getting ready to invite them to Camp David, opening up a prison of 5,000 Taliban and probably ISIS-K individuals and letting them free. I mean, we don't know whether some of them were involved in the attack that occurred. These were the decisions that led to what you're seeing and the danger that exists at the airport. This should not have happened. President Biden closing the Bagram Air Base. That's what's led to what's happening. So right now you have to ask, okay, what's the action we could take at this very last minute, which is most likely to get most Americans and most of our friends out of Afghanistan? That's a decision that the commanders on the ground are going to have to make. But the reality is, the fact that we're in this position is the result of bad decisions made by two administrations.
Just to play devil's advocate here, Senator, both Trump and Biden were trying to end the war in Afghanistan. And I recognize that you disagree with the decision to pull all troops out. You've said you would have left behind a residual force of, I think you said around 5,000 service members, mainly focused on counterterrorism. Many of the service members killed on Thursday were just born when the war began in 2001. How do you respond to people who say that that fact that we've been there 20 years, the collapse of the Afghan government and the Afghan military, is just more evidence that the American people, American service members, no matter how brave, no matter how valorous, they were never going to be able to stabilize Afghanistan, and this shows that the U.S. is correct in leaving?
Well, Jake, there's a political slogan, end endless wars, but that doesn't translate into a serious policy decision. And the real policy is this: you can't, as one party, end a war. It takes two parties to end a war. The Taliban and the radical violent jihadists in the world, they haven't stopped fighting. They're going to continue to fight us. The war is not over. We're just no longer in a place where the war had its apex, where the Taliban was able to allow al-Qaeda to grow and to attack us on 9/11. We went to Afghanistan because we got attacked on 9/11 and lost thousands of American lives. Now America is more in danger. The reason we have a military is to protect America. And by the decision to pull our military out of Afghanistan puts us in greater danger. Don't forget, we went to Afghanistan to knock down al-Qaeda, but we stayed in Afghanistan to make sure they couldn't reconstitute to attack us again. So pulling out means we are less safe, and also recognize the war is not over. We're just in a weaker position. We don't have boots on the ground. We don't have eyes on the ground. When they say, look, we have over-the-horizon capacity, that's a fancy phrase. What does that mean? It means we're not there. The nearest American air base is, what, 1,000 miles away? I mean, you know, I had eyes on my over the horizon on my teenagers, but that meant I had no idea what they were doing. Likewise, this idea that somehow we're still in control is not real, and America is in greater danger.
So I hear you saying that you think we're less safe for leaving Afghanistan than if we have stayed. Do you think that we are less safe now than we were before we went into Afghanistan 20 years ago?
Well, I think that's hard to measure, but we're certainly less safe than we were when we had a group of, let's say, 5,000 American service people in Afghanistan standing up as the backbone behind some 250,000 Afghan troops who were keeping at bay the Taliban and other terror groups. That made us a great deal safer. And by the way, we have thousands of troops, tens of thousands of troops in Germany, in South Korea, in Japan. Why are they there? They're there not as favors to those countries, but because we believe that keeps us and the world safer. And the idea that we would keep several thousand troops in Afghanistan as long as necessary to keep us more safe is, of course, the appropriate policy to take. But these political slogans come in the way. End endless wars. The war is not ended when only one party pulls out and the others are continuing to fight, and now fight with more aggression. Look, going forward, we're going to have to recognize we're in a much more dangerous position, and we're going to have to invest, I'm afraid, more resources to keep ourselves safe.
I've heard that argument before about the fact that the U.S. service members are stationed in Germany and Japan and in South Korea. But it's also true that they're not being killed by IEDs or by an insurgent group. And you know, I've talked to, look, veterans like everybody else are all over the map when it comes to this decision and this horrible week and this and that. But I have talked to some veterans, conservatives even, who say, I'm glad we're getting out. I don't want any more Gold Star families created.
Yeah, the reality is we're even have a greater reason to main troops in a place where there is hostility, because those people are going to bring their hostility to America and to Americans and to our friends, whether we like it or not. The idea that somehow we can pull out of a dangerous place where radical violent jihadists are organizing, that we can pull out of that and that's going to stop them, well, that's fantasy. They're going to continue in their effort to regroup and to come after America. Don't forget what they did on 9/11. The reason, again, we're in Afghanistan was to keep another 9/11 from happening. Now we pull out. And the Taliban is much stronger than they were before, in part because of all the armament we've given them. ISIS-K is now alive. The old ISIS that still is in Syria and Iraq, they're stronger. These forces of hate that consider America the great Satan, they're still out there. They're still fighting us. That war, unfortunately, goes on. And the idea that we've pulled out of one of the places that was essential to push back against them is an idea that makes me far more concerned that had we retained a small footprint there to support the people on the front lines, the Afghan National Security Forces, that were doing a pretty darn good job.
Your home state of Utah is welcoming.
And there you see Jake Tapper transitions to a new topic of Republicans who aren't being welcoming of refugees, even though Utah and Mitt Romney are very welcoming, as Jake Tapper softens his question there at the beginning you saw. But like I said, I think Jake Tapper did the best job of probing some of the Republican talking points. We should have left a small force, that the problem is with how we got out, and he did some good things there. I do have a few criticisms, though. First, he my criticisms of the next couple clips are that CBS's Ed O'Keefe and Chris Wallace, Fox News's Chris Wallace, did not do a good job of getting Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, respectively, to admit to mistakes made getting into the war in Afghanistan and prolonging it by the George W. Bush administration, because both Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell endorsed the George W. Bush policy. Mitt Romney, I mean, he was a governor. He was not so much as identified with the George W. Bush Afghanistan policy, but even so, he said a couple times in that 7-minute answer, this is terrible decision by two administrations, not 4. And I've talked extensively in the last 2 weeks about how George W. Bush made a big mistake losing his focus on Afghanistan because of the bogus war in Iraq, letting Osama bin Laden get away in Tora Bora. I mean, that would have been the best end to the war in Afghanistan, was killing or capturing Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora and then beginning the withdrawal, and the whole pivot to making Afghanistan so that it will never be full of lawless regions where people can plot terror attacks against the United States. That seems, given the terrain of Afghanistan and how it's never been controlled by a central government anyway, that seems like that was never, if that was ever our goal, that was a bad goal, and certainly the nation building goal was bad. But a couple other things that Mitt Romney said that he shouldn't have gotten away with there, I think, that he said it takes 2 to end a war. And that was his big response to it. It's the endless war isn't over. It's still going on because it takes 2 to end a war. Well, if the war is you invade another country and then you take your troops out of that other country, that pretty much is a way one can end a war. I totally disagree with that. He's, I guess, trying to make some larger point about how we're still vulnerable to terrorism, but as the Biden administration keeps saying, that threat is in many places. I think I saw Biden say if Osama bin Laden had gone from Saudi Arabia to Yemen, we would have attacked Yemen and never been in Afghanistan. So it's kind of a bogus argument. One thing Mitt Romney said that I liked was that whole thing. He did sort of poke fun at one of those military-industrial complex phrases that are hiding more than they're saying, the over-horizon capability. He said, well, I had over-horizon capability with my teenagers and had no idea what they were doing. That I at least give him credit for that. But then he also said we're trying to keep another 9/11 from happening, which, as I was saying before, we were trying to get the people who did 9/11, but creating a stable central government in Afghanistan is not how you keep another 9/11 from happening. And trying to say what we're doing is keeping another 9/11 from happening, when what you're really saying is a stable central government in Afghanistan at the cost of 5,000 troops. I mean, that was one other thing that Jake Tapper did well. He made a distinction between the troops in Japan and South Korea and Germany after World War II, where, you know, World War II isn't still going on with those troops there. But I think he let Mitt Romney get away with saying, you know, that he tried to claim that there wasn't a lot of threat to the troops, which I think what's happened in the last week says that's not really so true. But anyway, I had to give a significant amount of criticism to the Mitt Romney clip there because it was 7 minutes long. The next two Republicans are about 5 minutes long. Ed O'Keefe in this next one, CBS News Face the Nation, does a really poor job of cross-examining Lindsey Graham. But instead of pre-criticizing the clip, I've talked long enough. I'll play that clip and I will tell you the points I want to make about Ed O'Keefe's poor cross-examination of Senator Lindsey Graham, who really is identified with the George W. Bush endless war policies. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch the entire interview. This is the whole, 5 minutes together over here.
I know you are no fan of how the president is conducting this withdrawal, but give us a specific sense of what you would have done differently.
Well, number one, I wouldn't have withdrawn. I would have kept the counterterrorism forces on the ground. Your reporter indicated that when we have people on the ground working with indigenous forces, that's the best insurance policy against another 9/11. I would have held the Taliban to the conditions set out in the agreement with Trump. But let me tell you where I think we're at. This is a cataclysmic, just a fair beyond my ability to describe it. It's been a very emotional couple of days for all of us. The parade of horribles are about to unfold. We're leaving thousands of Afghan allies behind who fought bravely with us. We're going to leave hundreds of American citizens behind. The chance of another 9/11 just went through the roof. These drone attacks will not degrade ISIS. The number of ISIS fighters have doubled. We've turned our back on our allies, who's going to help us in the future, and we've set the conditions for another 9/11. I've never been more worried about an attack on our homeland than I am right now, and we did not end this war. President Biden said that he wanted to take this Afghanistan off the plate for future presidents. He's done the exact opposite. For the next 20 years, American presidents would be dealing with this catastrophe in Afghanistan. This war has not ended. We've entered into a new deadly chapter. Terrorists are now in charge of Afghanistan.
Let me just have you clarify one thing. You said we're going to leave thousands of Americans behind. The State Department believes it's only a few hundreds of Americans. Okay,
hundreds of Americans behind. Yeah,
I wanted to make sure you didn't know something we didn't.
Left behind.
Understood. You've talked about propping up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've talked about propping up some former Afghan government officials as a new provisional government that the United States should recognize.
Right.
How would that work, and would that require us having a far greater presence in the country?
Good question. First thing we need to do is not recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. This is a coup d'etat. Boris Johnson said, don't recognize the Taliban. You don't want to recognize a terrorist group who takes land by force. So we have the vice president under the Constitution of Afghanistan in Panjshir province. He has a resistance force. We can provide humanitarian aid. We can provide military assistance. I'm not suggesting we have troops on the ground, but that can be an evacuation site for the future. The last thing you want to do is legitimize this terrorist takeover of Afghanistan. We're going to have hostages left behind, American citizens. I would counsel the Biden administration, do not legitimize the Taliban, do not recognize them, because if you do, you're going to put Americans at risk all over the world, because other terrorist organizations will see, aha, the best way to get America's attention and legitimacy is to kidnap some Americans or people who fought with America. We're in a very dangerous situation in Afghanistan, and I worry about the consequences of how we deal with Afghanistan can affect our footprint all over the world.
Sure. In your view, what kind of consequences should the president face for the decisions he made on Afghanistan?
Well, did he get good advice and turn it down? Did he get bad advice and take it? What the hell happened? Whose decision was it to pull all the troops out? Was it good advice ignored? I just don't know. I think he should be facing a lot of consequences here, because the one thing he wanted to do, and he's a decent man, it's not about him being a decent man, is he wanted to end the war in Afghanistan and make sure we didn't have to deal with it in the future. He's done the exact opposite. General Biden's fingerprints are all over this. He's created the conditions for ISIS to flourish in Afghanistan. They've doubled the number of troops available because of the jailbreak. A terrorist organization called the Taliban is now in charge of the country. The likelihood of an attack on our homeland is through the roof. It was medium a month ago. It's got to be high as hell right now.
Right.
And you cannot break ISIS' will through drone attacks. You've got to have people on the ground hitting these people day in and day out. You can't do it over the horizon. He deserves a lot of accountability for this, and I'm sure it will be coming.
Senator, one word I don't hear you using is one you were using before the attack on Thursday, and that is you called for his impeachment over Afghanistan. Do you still feel he should be impeached over this?
Yeah, I think it's dereliction of duty to leave hundreds of Americans behind enemy lines, turn them into hostages, to abandon thousands of Afghans who fought honorably along our side, to create conditions for another 9/11 that are now through the roof. Yeah, I think he's been derelict in his duties as Commander-in-Chief. I don't think he got bad advice and took it. I think he ignored sound advice. And this is Joe Biden being Joe Biden. He's been this way for 40 years, but now he's the Commander-in-Chief. He's not a senator. He's not the Vice President. These are Commander-in-Chief decisions. I think the best you could describe them as dereliction of duty at the highest level.
Senator Graham, a erstwhile friend of the president, obviously disagrees with him on this. We appreciate your
erstwhile friend of the president. That even makes him seem more reasonable than that lame cross-examination also bolstered Lindsey Graham's argument. What was that weird thing at the beginning where Lindsey Graham couldn't say the word catastrophic? That I don't know. But one of the weird things was Ed O'Keefe did such a poor job cross-examining Lindsey Graham on what he actually said, but he misheard him and said, you said thousands of Americans are going to be left behind when it's only going to be hundreds. And there's actually no evidence that hundreds of Americans are going to be left behind. But if you listen, Lindsey Graham didn't actually say thousands. He said hundreds of Americans and thousands of Afghan allies or whatever. So his one big cross-examination point was wrong. And after, he never asked Lindsey Graham about his own complicity in the Afghan policy gone wrong I talked about earlier in terms of George W. Bush's going to Iraq, which of course Lindsey Graham was a big supporter of the Iraq War, and the failure to get bin Laden and Tora Bora, and the shift to nation building, which there is being disguised with preventing another 9/11, which what they're really saying is controlling all of Afghanistan, or at least to the extent that you can stop people in. It's really like rough mountainous territory. I just watched again this movie Lone Survivor. Marky Mark, what's his name, was the star of that. Just reinforced how difficult that whole war was for me. The true story of Navy SEAL Mark Luttrell, who was the that's why for some reason I can't remember. Mark Wahlberg, I don't know why I couldn't remember Mark Wahlberg, but it was, I don't think that you can expect that 5,000 troops in Kabul are going to affect what's going on up in those mountains. That I think requires a lot more force, and Ed O'Keefe let Lindsey Graham get away with that, and instead, after he said all that stuff, says, sure, but what kind of consequences should Biden face for his bad decisions? He was basically he was trying to get a soundbite on impeachment, trying to get Lindsey Graham to say he supported impeachment, and he sort of did there, you saw, but that doesn't seem to be like the best cross-examination to me, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to another... Oh, before I do, I always like to read the live comments along the way, and I did see that I got one super chat contribution from Matthew that I wanted to highlight here. Thanks, Matthew. I appreciate that you think I'm doing a good job. I'm doing the best I can. I spend many hours watching those shows and deciding which clips to pick out and adding my media criticism and political commentary. If you like what I'm doing, give me a thumbs up. You can give me supportive comments down in the comment section, both for the live viewers and the recorded show viewers. And live viewers can give those super chat contributions. Both live and recorded show viewers can click on the join button under this video to become a YouTube member, or even better, a patron on Patreon. There's a link down in the video description to become a patron on Patreon, and also to give direct PayPal contributions. That's my moment of e-begging for the week. And now I will get to the final Republican being cross-examined poorly by Chris Wallace. This is the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell. Mr. Turtle, as Jon Stewart used to make fun of him. Well, that seems to be like almost a universal parody of Mitch McConnell. And if you look at the thumbnail, I got him in a real like turtle-looking face, which is very near the beginning of this Fox News Sunday clip where Chris Wallace... I edited this out, otherwise it would have been 8 minutes long. It's actually closer to like 5.5 minutes. And Chris Wallace in his introduction talks about how Americans may end up hostage in Afghanistan, which is something Mitch McConnell repeated in the part of his answer I cut out, but I couldn't show the clip without pointing out how Fox News was supporting Republican talking points, as they so often do. But what Chris Wallace really fails at is pinning down Mitch McConnell on the real reason we went into Afghanistan, despite him having written a whole book about it, as I'll talk about after we watch Chris Wallace and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell over here.
Despite critics' fears, thousands of Americans and Afghan allies will be left behind, creating a possible hostage situation. The White House is holding firm. It will pull all U.S. forces out of Afghanistan by Tuesday. Joining us now, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who has urged the president to disregard that deadline. Senator, you just heard my conversation with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Your reaction?
Yeah, I think what's been lost in all this, Chris, is why we went there in the first place. We went there to prevent the Taliban from having a regime that would allow terrorists to reconstitute themselves and hit us again here at home. It's been a total success. This term endless war, let's take a look at it. The last 7 months, the Afghans have lost more people fighting than we have over 20 years. They've taken 65,000 casualties. We've taken roughly 2,000 in 20 years. The last year and a half, we've lost no one. With a continued deployment of 2,500 people, we were in effect keeping the lid on, keeping terrorists from reconstituting, and having a light footprint in the country. The policy was working. Therefore, I think calling it an endless war or claiming that we're somehow trying to get involved in a civil war, a domestic civil war, is simply not accurate. We went over there to protect us here at home. We've not had a mass casualty attack from over there in these 20 years. I'd call that a successful policy. Now, we're looking at the exit. And over the next 2 days, our heroic military is doing as best they can with a horrible policy decision. This is one of the worst foreign policy decisions in American history. Much worse than Saigon, because after we left Saigon, there weren't Vietnamese terrorists who were planning on attacking us here at home. That we leave behind exactly what we went in to solve 20 years ago, and I fear for the future in continuing the war on terror. You know, just because we decide to quit fighting doesn't mean the terrorists go away. So they're still out there. They're invigorated, they're emboldened, and excited about the success they see in bringing America to its knees in Afghanistan.
I want to get into the big policy question, the total withdrawal, in a moment, but let's talk about where we find. Let's turn to the big policy question that you started with, and that is the decision to pull out of Afghanistan in the first place. You've been very consistent. You opposed it when Donald Trump started the process. You opposed it when Joe Biden continued the process. And back when he announced that, yes, in April, he said, I'm going to get everybody out by the end of August, you noted the fact, as you did today, that for more than a year, not a single American had been killed in combat in Afghanistan. President Biden was asked about that this week, and he pointed out the fact that they didn't attack us after Donald Trump had made the deal that all of Americans were going to get out. Take a look at what the president had to say.
I'd have only one alternative: pour thousands of more troops back into Afghanistan to fight a war that we had already won relative to the reason we went in the first place.
Senator, does President Biden have a point there? If in April he had said, hey, the Trump deal is off, we're staying in fact, we're going to beef up the number of troops, he contends we'd have been back in a full-scale war with the Taliban and unfortunately taking a lot of casualties.
It's totally not accurate. Once again, the president's off the mark. We hadn't lost as many as 13 people, which we lost Thursday, in any of the last 4 years. In fact, our casualties since 2014 have been quite modest, quite modest. We lost more, I repeat, more of our military personnel last Thursday than we lost in any one of the last 4 years. So the violence has been dramatically reduced for American personnel. Remember, in the whole war, Chris, we have regretfully lost a couple of thousand of our people. That's very regretful. But the Afghans have lost 65,000. They have been fighting, and we've been in the background helping them with counterterrorism and the ongoing training of the military. The policy was working, if you remember why we went there, which was to keep the Taliban out and the terrorists from being able to operate with impunity so they could attack us again here at home.
Senator, I've got about a minute left. I want to ask you one question on another subject. You've been very active on the issue of COVID.
So there you see Chris Wallace changes the subject, and I edited out the middle part, like I said, and Chris Wallace at least gets some credit for cross-examining the idea that if you just left a small force, they would have as much success as the small U.S. forces had since the negotiations for withdrawal began, because during those negotiations, the Taliban wasn't attacking. But so Chris Wallace at least asked that, but the thing he never asked or never cross-examined Mitch McConnell on there was both in the first part and the last part of that clip, he talked about, we leave behind exactly what we went in to solve 20 years ago at the beginning. And then, why we went in was to keep the Taliban out and stop them from hitting us again. Well, no, actually, the reason we went in was to get Osama bin Laden, which, of course, the George W. Bush administration failed to do because they took their focus off Afghanistan to go to Iraq. But what really adds the insult to injury on Chris Wallace's failure to cross-examine Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on that point is at the very end of the program, he actually promotes his book on that point, as you can see over in this clip.
One final note. As we end our 20-year war in Afghanistan, it's worth remembering we did accomplish our prime objective there. I've written a new book called Countdown Bin Laden, the untold story of the 247-day hunt to bring the mastermind of 9/11 to justice. It's the behind-the-scenes account of how America's intelligence, political, and military branches came together to pull it off. You can pre-order Countdown now. It comes out September 7th.
So there you see, like I said, that Chris Wallace was promoting a book on the exact point he forgot to cross-examine Mitch McConnell on. The primary purpose of going into Afghanistan, according to Chris Wallace. Why didn't that ever come up when he was talking to Mitch McConnell? You can let me know what you think about that question. And now I'm going to show the one brief clip on the COVID-19 topic, even though that may be the most important topic, looking back on this week from history, like I was saying earlier. And this is Dr. Anthony Fauci was on several programs talking about multiple important issues. I have him here talking both about the need for a third vaccination that we're doing here in the United States, even though a lot of countries, they can't even get their first one. Well, apparently we're going to need one after 8 months, or we're going to get vaccination boosters 8 months after our second vaccinations. And then here's also Martha Raddatz asking Anthony Fauci to respond to this intelligence report that came out this week with inconclusive results as to the origins of COVID-19. That's another big right-wing talking point. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final clip together, final news clip before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. Here's that Dr. Anthony Fauci talking to Martha Raddatz yesterday over here.
Dr. Fauci, President Biden, you heard him say there that they're looking at whether booster shots should be given sooner than 8 months, perhaps as early as 5 months. What's your recommendation?
Well, we're still sticking with the 8 months, Martha. However, as we've said, even in the original statement that came out, we're going to have to go through the standard way of the FDA looking at the data and then the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So although we're sticking with 8, we're remaining flexible that if the data tells us differently, we'll make adjustments accordingly. But for now, we're sticking with the 8.
And finally, Dr. Fauci, the intelligence community delivered that review on the origins of coronavirus. It was inconclusive. Will we ever know?
You know, I hope so, Martha, because it will help us to avoid this in the future. But we will need the cooperation of Chinese scientists and Chinese public health officials if we're going to do the proper surveillance serologically of people who were infected in China, as well as the animals, being able to assess whether or not animals have viruses that are closely related to SARS-CoV-2. We'll need to do that in China with the cooperation of the Chinese.
Well, we'll hope we get that done. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Dr. Fauci.
We hope we get that done. That seems like a very optimistic view of the Chinese, that they're going to give us their cooperation to find that out. That would be my criticism there of Martha Raddatz and Anthony Fauci about that second topic. But the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic, I'll have plenty of time to talk about it in future weeks. I saw you all talking about it in the live comments. I also saw that Deborah Strayer and Sana Hayes both gave me super chat contributions. Thanks for that. Sana, I saw you have been trying for weeks to show up on time for the live show. So it's noon on Monday Pacific time every week, or I had to delay it for a Biden press conference 1 week. But that's the great thing about doing it on Monday, is it's going to be the same time every week on Monday for at least the next few months while I reassess my options and see whether people start showing up for the live show as it becomes available at the new time. And anyway, that's the end of the news clips. I did promise you a Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip to end the show. Here, I've had too many food bowl clips, though I guess I got a live clip from during the show last week. But here is Dash and Sandy at the door, both going outside into the smoky Sacramento AQI problem. That's the air quality index. Lots of smoke here, but you know, if you got to go outside, you got to go outside. And Dash and Sandy doing this clip. So that's the Dash and Sandy clip. That's it for the show. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you all next Monday at noon Pacific time. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.